Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read a part of the book First Steps in East Africa, or an exploration of Harar by one Sir Richard Burton, where he discusses the relationship between the Somali people and the other groups of people that lived amongst them. And if you've watched my videos, you know I've discussed about the different communities and the people who lived under them. For example, among the Kwafi, there were the people called the Dorobo who lived amongst them, and they were mostly hunter-gatherers. Same thing to Kikuyu, there were the Hadi people and the Agumbar people who lived among them. And among the Luo, there were the Kombe Kombe. So these groups of people who live under the larger community, or in such a way that they were a different group of people, but they lived under this larger group and they were identified as a different group of people. Sometimes they spoke a different language, but often they embraced the language of the people they lived with. Those are the kinds of people I'm talking about. Now, among the Somali people, there are all these people, and there were several groups, and I think I've mentioned them in other videos. One that is so commonly mentioned is the Tomal people. Now, in this book that is written by Sir Richard Burton, this is a very old book actually. This is a book that was published in 1850s, and this is a book about the exploration, as he calls it, or expedition to Harar. He had been sent there by the British, we can say the British East India Company, but we can say basically the British government. He was an intelligence officer, even though he's portrayed as an explorer. In this particular case, we are sure that he was sent out to Harar to go and pick and collect information that could then be used against the people of Harar. And the British at this time were very much interested in taking control of the port of Berbera. So that's what he was going to do. And this book, it details his journeys from Aden, southern Yemen, to Zeila, and then his way to Harar. Now, he discusses many things in the book, of course, and at one part of the book, he is telling us is basically giving us the picture of the society in Somalia, but specifically in Zeila, the first city where he went and stayed for a moment before he started his journey to Harar. And it's while he's telling us about what was happening there that he explains to us the different groups that lived among the Somalis and the relationship that existed. Now, I'm going to read that part, and this part is basically notes. It's not actually the main book. These are notes that he writes on the side, we can say on the side, as he explains different things that he mentions. And at some point, he mentions these other people, and then he makes a very long note telling us who these people were and the relationship that the Somalis had with these people. And he says, the system of caste which prevails in Al Yaman, though not in the northern parts of Arabia, is generally throughout the Somali country. Now it tells us while this system did not exist, especially in the northern sides of the Arabian Peninsula, it existed in the southern part, and then it existed in the Somali country, where people were put in different categories or different groups. And this says the principal families of the outcasts are as the following. Now, he uses the word outcast. That's a very strong word to use, a word that today is not generally used. Of course, even the word caste is it's used in some societies. For example, in the Indian subcontinent, it's a word that is used often, but in other parts of the world, it's a word that is not generally used that much. So he uses that word, and he also uses the word of outcast, which means people who don't belong in the mainstream society. They are kind of like shunned or treated to be different. Their bir corresponds with the Dushan of southern Arabia. The males are usually jesters to the chiefs, and both sexes take certain parts at festivals, marriages, and circumcisions. Now, there is this first group he mentions, the Abir, and sounds like this group was also found in southern Arabia. And this group, he says, they were mostly, we can say, entertainers. They used to be entertainers to chiefs and such people, and then they could do some functions or to perform some functions in ceremonies and festivals such as marriages and, of course, circumcisions. The number is said to be small, amounting to about 100 families in northern Somali country. So the number of these people was not that big, at least during this time. Now, I don't know who these people are today, or they exist, or at some point they just got assimilated completely into the Somali society such that they no longer exist. I would like to hear from people who might know something about these people, whether these people called the Abir still exist, and if they exist, what is their current relationship with the mainstream Somali society. And then he says, the Tomal or Handat the blacksmiths, originally of Ayar race, have become vile by intermarriage with serviles. Now, this is a very interesting line because he's basically saying, of course, there are these people called Tomal. I've heard about them. I've come across them mentioned in other documents, and in particular, they are mentioned by Sir Charles Elliot in his document, the East Africa Protectorate. Now, he says that these people, they originally were of the Idurus. Maybe I'm not pronouncing that word appropriately. But he says over time they've become vile, which they have become sort of unclean because they started intermarrying with we can call servants, something of sort. Of course, in that society there were, we can say, people who served others. So by them, seems like at some point they were treated to be equal to everybody in the society, but then they started intermarrying with the people who were considered to be lower class, and then they were considered to be no longer clean. He continues to say, they must now wed maidens of their own class and live apart from the community. Their magical practices are feared by the people. The connection of wits and witchcraft is obvious, and all private quarrels are traced to them. So this is one of those groups of people that seems like it had a very complicated relationship with the mainstreams of Somali society. Because these people, of course, we've been told that they made themselves, we can use the word unclean, and then they could not marry with other people. Now they were forced to marry just amongst themselves. But something else happens, and that is that these people were thought to have some magical abilities, and we can say witchcraft. And because of this, the rest of the people feared them because it seems like they were considered to be a source of trouble. But at the same time, these people were blacksmiths. And that means they were very useful to that society because it's a society that needed tools. They needed spears, they needed swords, they needed different kinds of instruments and tools that would be made from metal. And so these people are very important. They were very critical to that society because they would be used to produce these tools and instruments. But at the same time, they were considered to be a source of trouble. So that's a very complex kind of relationship. He continues to say, it has been observed that the blacksmith has ever been looked upon with awe by barbarians on the same principle that made Vulcan a deity. Now, Vulcan is a god in the Romans, I think, in the Roman society, ancient Romans. And this was a deity or a god that was associated with the works of blacksmiths. So it was a god of blacksmith or something of that sort. So the people, the mainstream Somali society during this time, looked at these people with some level of fear and of course veneration, sort of, to some level, not really, but you get the point I'm making, especially when he uses the word awe. And then he says how these people are treated in other societies. He said in Abyssinia, all artisans are Buddha, sorcerers, especially the blacksmith. And he is a social outcast as amongst the Somal. Even in Al-Hijaz, a land unlike Al-Yaman, opposed to distinctions among Muslims, the Kalawiya who work in metal are considered vile. So these people who work with the metals, and this is not only a Somali thing, because I've read it was Ludwig Kraft's document about the Wakwafi people. Now the Wakwafi, some people say are the current Maasai, some people say, especially including Ludwig Kraft, that was a different society. But the structure of the Kwafi is similar to the structure of the Maasai up to date. Now among the Kwafi, there are people called the Kunono. Now, the Kunono were exactly these people. Their work was to produce metallic products, and they were treated separate from the rest of society. Of course, there are the Dorobo who were mostly hunters, but there were the Kunono who were working with metals. And I think I've read somewhere about the Kunono in other societies, especially in the North Rift, who did the works of metals. Now, these people are found among the Somali, and they do the same thing, and they are treated almost the same way the Maasai treated, or the Kwafi treated the Kunono. And then he says that even the lands of Al Yaman, which of course is in Arabia, or I think is in Arabia, these people were treated different, even though the religion of Islam required that all people are treated the same, but these people were treated separate. And that leaves me wondering what was so special about the blacksmiths in all these societies that they were treated different. I'm struggling to understand. There must be an explanation somewhere. Why were these people treated so different, both in Middle East and Africa, East Africa, maybe even the rest of Africa? I've not read documents from the other parts of Africa to see how these people were treated. He continues to say, throughout the rest of Islam, the blacksmith is respected as reading in the path of David, the father of the craft. Now, besides the Arabian part and the East Africa, the other parts, the other regions where Islam was the dominant religion, the blacksmiths were respected. So there must be an explanation as to why the blacksmiths were treated different in Eastern Africa, especially among the Somali, among the Kwafi, among the Maasai, among the different groups of East Africa. There must be a reason why they were treated that different. They were not treated with respect, but at the same time, there was such a critical component of those societies, especially these are societies that depended on weapons that were made by these people. So if, say, somebody who has an idea as to why these people were treated so differently, I'll be happy to hear that. And if somebody has a document that explains it, I'll be interested to read such a document. Now, he continues to say, the word Tomal, opposed to Somal, is indigenous. Handad is palpably a corruption of the Arabic Hadad, iron maker. So he explains the words or the names. He continues, Midgan, one hand, corresponds with Kadim of Al-Yaman. He is called Rami or Archer by the Arabs. There are three distinct tribes of these people who are numerous in the Somali country. The best genealogists cannot trace their origin, though some are silly enough to derive them, like the Akdam from Shimr. All, however, agree in expelling the Midgan from the gentle blood of Somaliland, and his position has been compared to that of freedmen among the Romans. So there is this other group of people, the Midgan, and they're also treated in a different way, separate from the mainstream society. So he says these people are free, but there is something about them, and they are not allowed to mix their blood with the mainstream Somali society. He continues, these people take service under different chiefs who sometimes entertained great numbers to aid in forays and fray. They do not, however, confine themselves to one craft. Many Midgans employ themselves in hunting and agriculture. Now, reading this part, this made me think or compare the Midgan to maybe the Dorobo among the Kwafi and the Maasai. While the Tomal are like the Kunono, I think the Midgan are like the Dorobo, more of hunter-gatherers, while the Tomal were like blacksmiths, like just among the Kwafi, the Kunono are blacksmiths, and then the Dorobo are hunters for the most part. So this is very interesting, actually, and I would like to hear more about these Midgan people, and if they still exist, who are they, and what is their position today in the larger Somali society? It's something I'm really interested to know. Yeah, so that's what I read from this book about these people. He took, at least Sir Richard Burton took a moment to explain or to give some details about these people. Of course, he was also an outsider, so I don't think he got everything accurately. Maybe he missed some things, or he mispresented a few points or facts about these people and the relationship they had with the larger Somali society. I would like to hear from people who have some knowledge about these groups of people. Those are my random thoughts.